The ancient stone corridors of Ravenscroft Palace held their secrets well, but Marcus Thornfield had learned to read the subtle signs that most people missed. After 15 years serving as a royal guard in the kingdom of Valdoria, he could sense when something was amiss in the sprawling castle that had been home to the Blackwood dynasty for over 3 centuries. On this particular Tuesday morning in October, the autumn mist clung to the palace windows like ghostly fingers, and Marcus felt an unusual tension crackling through the air. The queen consort, Lady Evangeline Blackwood, had been acting strangely for weeks, her usual composed demeanor replaced by nervous glances and whispered phone calls that ceased the moment anyone approached. Marcus had been assigned to the East Wing security detail, a routine posting that typically involved nothing more eventful than escorting visiting dignitaries and ensuring the precious artwork remained undisturbed. But today, as he made his rounds through the portrait gallery, he noticed something that made his trained eye pause. One of the ancient oil paintings, a stern-faced ancestor from the 1600s, was hanging slightly askew. His military training kicked in immediately. Nothing in the royal residence moved without reason, and certainly not a painting that weighed nearly 50 pounds and hung on specially designed security mounts. Marcus approached the portrait of Lord Aldrich Blackwood, examining it carefully. The frame appeared untouched, but when he pressed gently against the corner to straighten it, he felt something unusual. A slight give in the wall behind. Years of security training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about this felt wrong. Very wrong. After glancing around to ensure he was alone, Marcus carefully lifted the heavy painting from its mount. Behind it, hidden in the thick stone wall, was a small cavity that definitely hadn't been there during the routine security sweep just 3 months prior. Inside the hollow space, he found a compact recording device, no larger than a smartphone, with a sophisticated camera lens pointed directly toward the seating area near the tall windows where Lady Evangeline often took her afternoon tea. The device was professional grade, far beyond anything an amateur would use, and it was still recording, as evidenced by the small red light blinking steadily in the dim space. Marcus's heart began to race. Someone had been conducting surveillance within the royal residence. A breach of security so serious it bordered on treason. But who would have the access and opportunity to install such equipment in one of the most secure buildings in the kingdom? The implications were staggering. He carefully photographed the device's position with his phone before extracting it from its hiding place. The recording device was still warm, indicating it had been recently active. As he examined it more closely, he noticed it was broadcasting to an external receiver. Someone, somewhere, had been watching and listening to everything that happened in this room. The weight of discovery settled heavily on his shoulders. Protocol demanded that he immediately report this to Captain Morrison, the head of palace security. But something held him back. The sophisticated nature of the surveillance equipment, its perfect positioning, and the fact that it had gone undetected through multiple security sweeps suggested this was an inside job. Someone with intimate knowledge of the palace's security systems and daily routines had orchestrated this. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of immediately reporting his find, he decided to review what had been recorded first. If there was a security breach of this magnitude, he needed to understand the scope of what had been compromised before alerting anyone who might themselves be involved in the conspiracy. Finding a secure location proved challenging within the palace walls. Every room had the potential for surveillance. Every corner might harbor another set of eyes and ears. Finally, he settled on the old armory in the basement level, a room that had been converted to storage decades ago and was rarely visited by anyone except maintenance staff. Connecting the device to his personal laptop, Marcus discovered that it contained nearly 6 weeks of footage. His hands trembled slightly as he began to scroll through the recorded files, starting with the most recent entries. What he saw in those first few minutes of playback would haunt him for the rest of his life. The recording showed Lady Evangeline in her private moments, certainly, but more disturbing were the audio conversations she'd had in what she believed was the privacy of her personal sitting room. The device had captured everything: phone calls, private meetings, and most shocking of all, detailed conversations with someone identified only as the facilitator. These weren't innocent conversations. Lady Evangeline was clearly involved in something that went far beyond typical royal duties. The recordings revealed discussions about the succession plan, removing obstacles, And most chilling of all, multiple references to ensuring Prince Sebastian never takes the throne. Prince Sebastian Blackwood, heir apparent to the Kingdom of Valdoria, was beloved by the people and respected by the military. His father, King Aldwin IV, had been grooming him for leadership for years, and the transition was expected to be smooth when the time came. But these recordings suggested that Lady Evangeline, who had married into the royal family just 5 years earlier, had very different plans for the kingdom's future. Marcus paused the playback, his mind reeling from what he'd just heard. Lady Evangeline wasn't just conducting private business. She was actively plotting against the rightful heir to the throne. The recordings contained enough evidence to charge her with treason, but they also raised a terrifying question. How many others were involved in this conspiracy? As he continued reviewing the footage, Marcus began to piece together a complex web of deception that reached far beyond the palace walls. The recordings revealed that Lady Evangeline had been in contact with foreign agents, political extremists, and most troubling of all, high-ranking officials within the kingdom's own government. The conspiracy wasn't just about changing the line of succession. It was about fundamentally altering the political structure of Valdoria itself. One conversation, recorded just a week earlier, made Marcus's blood run cold. Lady Evangeline had been speaking to someone about a window of opportunity that would present itself during the upcoming Harvest Festival celebration, an annual event that brought together the royal family, government officials, and thousands of citizens in the palace courtyard. Everything must be in place by November 1st. Lady Evangeline's voice was crystal clear on the recording. Once Sebastian is removed from the equation, we can move forward with installing our preferred candidate. The people will accept the change if it appears to be legitimate succession following a tragic accident. Marcus stopped the playback, his hands shaking. They were planning to kill Prince Sebastian at the Harvest Festival, which was less than 3 weeks away. The festival would provide perfect cover, with thousands of people in attendance and the chaos that naturally accompanied such large gatherings. A well-planned accident could easily be staged. But who was our preferred candidate? The recordings hadn't yet revealed who Lady Evangeline and her conspirators planned to install as the next ruler of Valdoria. It clearly wasn't her. As queen consort, she had no legitimate claim to the throne. Someone else was being positioned to take power, someone who would presumably be more amenable to whatever agenda was driving this elaborate plot. The implications extended beyond just the royal family. If successful, this conspiracy would effectively stage a coup within one of Europe's oldest surviving monarchies. The political ramifications would be felt throughout the continent, and the cultural and historical loss would be immeasurable. Marcus realized he was sitting on information that could prevent a political catastrophe. But he also understood that he was now in tremendous personal danger. If the conspirators discovered that their surveillance device had been found, they would know that someone had access to their plans. Given what they were willing to do to Prince Sebastian, Marcus had no illusions about what fate would await him if they identified him as a threat. The weight of responsibility was overwhelming. As a royal guard, he had sworn an oath to protect the royal family with his life. That oath now demanded that he find a way to expose this conspiracy and protect Prince Sebastian, but he couldn't trust anyone within the palace until he knew the full extent of the plot. He made copies of the most incriminating recordings onto multiple secure drives, hiding them in different locations both within and outside the palace. If something happened to him, he wanted to ensure that the evidence would eventually surface. The original device would need to be returned to its hiding place to avoid alerting the conspirators that their surveillance had been discovered. As Marcus carefully replaced the recording device behind the portrait of Lord Aldrich Blackwood, he reflected on the bitter irony. The ancestor whose painting had concealed this modern treachery had himself lived through a period of political upheaval in Valdoria's history. 3 centuries later, history seemed poised to repeat itself. The autumn afternoon was fading as Marcus completed his regular duties, but his mind was racing with plans and possibilities. He had roughly 2 weeks to figure out how to stop a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and involved unknown foreign powers. He was one man against what appeared to be a sophisticated network of traitors, and he had no idea who he could trust. That evening, as Marcus walked through the palace grounds on his way home to his small cottage on the estate, He noticed things he'd never paid attention to before. Which guards seemed nervous? Who was working unusual shifts? What staff members had access to the areas where surveillance equipment could be hidden? The paranoia was already beginning to take hold, but he knew it was necessary for survival. The ancient Valdorian motto, carved above the palace's main entrance, caught his eye as he passed beneath it: Veritas et honor, truth and honor. For 15 years, Marcus had served those principles without question. Now, those same principles demanded that he risk everything to expose a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of the kingdom he'd sworn to protect. As he reached his cottage, Marcus looked back at the imposing silhouette of Ravenscroft Palace against the darkening sky. Somewhere within those walls, traitors were finalizing plans to murder the heir to the throne and steal a crown that had been passed down through generations. The weight of stopping them now rested on his shoulders, and he was acutely aware that his next decisions would determine not just his own fate, but the future of the entire kingdom of Valdoria. The sleepless night that followed Marcus's discovery seemed to stretch endlessly. Every sound outside his cottage made him freeze. Every shadow beyond his windows could be a potential threat. By dawn, he had formulated a plan that was both dangerous and necessary. He needed to learn more about the conspiracy before taking any action that might alert the plotters to his knowledge. Marcus arrived at the palace earlier than usual that morning, using his security clearance to access areas that most staff never saw. The subterranean levels of Ravenscroft Palace contained a maze of storage rooms, maintenance tunnels, and forgotten chambers that dated back centuries. If there were additional surveillance devices hidden throughout the palace, these neglected spaces would be where he might find evidence of their control center. His search began in the old servants' quarters beneath the east wing. These rooms had been abandoned when the palace was modernized in the 1950s, but they still connected to the main building through a network of service corridors. Marcus methodically examined each room, looking for signs of recent activity: disturbed dust patterns, modern electrical installations, or any technology that seemed out of place in the historical setting. It was in the third room he searched that Marcus found what he was looking for. Hidden behind a false wall panel, someone had installed a sophisticated communication center, complete with multiple monitors, recording equipment, and what appeared to be a direct satellite uplink. The setup was professional grade, clearly designed for extended surveillance operations. The monitors showed live feeds from multiple locations throughout the palace. Marcus counted at least 12 different camera angles, covering everything from the royal family's private dining room to the secure conference room where King Aldwin met with his closest advisors. The scope of the surveillance operation was breathtaking and terrifying. More disturbing were the detailed files stored in the system's computer. The conspirators had been documenting the daily routines, security protocols, and personal habits of every member of the royal family for months. They knew exactly when Prince Sebastian would be where during the harvest festival, which routes he would take, and most chillingly, they had identified several opportunities where an accident could be staged with minimal risk of detection. Marcus photographed everything he could without disturbing the setup, but he knew he needed more information about the people involved. The recordings from Lady Evangeline's room had revealed the existence of conspirators, but hadn't identified them by name. The answer to that question lay in the detailed communication logs stored in the surveillance center's computer system. Accessing the encrypted files required skills Marcus had learned during his military service before joining the Royal Guard. His background in military intelligence, which had made him valuable for palace security, now proved crucial for uncovering the conspiracy threatening the kingdom. After nearly an hour of careful work, he managed to break through the encryption and access the communication records. The names he found in those files sent shockwaves through his understanding of how deep the conspiracy reached. Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackthorne, the king's most trusted advisor and architect of Valdoria's foreign policy for the past decade, was listed as Primary Contact Alpha. General Harrison Ashford, commander of the Royal Military Academy and responsible for training the kingdom's officer corps, was designated as Military Liaison. Most shocking of all was the inclusion of Lady Catherine Pemberton, the king's own sister and Prince Sebastian's aunt, listed simply as Royal Asset. The conspiracy wasn't just about removing Prince Sebastian from the line of succession. It was a complete infiltration of the kingdom's power structure by individuals who had been trusted with the highest levels of access and responsibility. The scope of the betrayal was beyond anything Marcus had imagined possible. Further investigation of the files revealed the true motive behind the conspiracy. The plotters weren't working alone. They were being directed and funded by the neighboring kingdom of Bretonia, Valdoria's historical rival. The goal wasn't simply to change leadership, but to weaken Valdoria's independence and eventually facilitate annexation by Bretonian forces. The preferred candidate for the throne was Prince Marcus Pemberton, Lady Catherine's son, who had been living in Bretonia for the past 5 years, ostensibly pursuing advanced diplomatic studies. In reality, he had been recruited and trained by Bretonian intelligence services to serve as their puppet ruler once the legitimate royal line was eliminated. The files contained detailed financial records showing that the conspiracy had been funded through shell corporations and offshore accounts controlled by Bretonian intelligence. Millions of dollars had been funneled into Valdoria to purchase loyalty, bribe officials, and acquire the sophisticated surveillance equipment that Marcus had discovered. Even more troubling was the timeline revealed in the communication logs. The conspiracy had been in development for over 2 years, with careful recruitment of assets and the gradual positioning of conspirators in key roles throughout Valdoria's government and military. The assassination of Prince Sebastian was merely the final phase of a much larger operation designed to deliver an entire kingdom into foreign control. Marcus realized that the Harvest Festival provided the perfect cover not just for Prince Sebastian's murder, but for a coordinated coup that would eliminate multiple targets simultaneously. The files indicated that King Aldwin was also marked for elimination, along with several other members of the royal family who might challenge the legitimacy of Prince Marcus Pemberton's claim to the throne. The communication logs revealed that the conspirators had been working to position their assets in crucial locations throughout the palace and government buildings. On the day of the Harvest Festival, when security would necessarily be spread thin across multiple locations and focused on crowd control, the conspirators would have clear opportunities to strike at their targets, while foreign agents provided support from outside the kingdom. As Marcus absorbed the magnitude of what he had discovered, he realized that traditional channels of reporting would be useless. With the Lord Chancellor, the military commander, and a member of the royal family all involved in the conspiracy, there was no way to know which other officials might be compromised. Any attempt to report through normal security protocols might actually alert the conspirators to his discovery. The weight of responsibility for stopping the conspiracy now rested entirely on his shoulders. He was one loyal guard against a network of traitors that had been planning this operation for years, and had resources and support from a foreign intelligence service. The odds seemed impossible, but the alternative, allowing the kingdom of Valdoria to fall to foreign control through the murder of its legitimate rulers, was unthinkable. Marcus carefully documented everything he had found, creating multiple copies of the evidence and hiding them in secure locations both within the palace and off the estate entirely. If something happened to him, he wanted to ensure that the truth would eventually emerge, even if it came too late to prevent the conspiracy from succeeding. His next challenge was figuring out how to protect Prince Sebastian and King Aldwin without alerting the conspirators to his knowledge. Any obvious changes to security protocols or daily routines would signal that someone had become aware of the plot. Marcus needed to find a way to neutralize the threat while maintaining the appearance that everything was proceeding normally. The solution came to him as he reviewed the festival security plans that had been distributed to all guard personnel. The conspirators' timeline depended on specific events happening at predetermined times during the celebration. If Marcus could subtly disrupt those timings without making it obvious that he was doing so deliberately, he might be able to prevent the assassination attempts while buying time to expose the larger conspiracy. But first, he needed to identify all the conspirators within the palace security force itself. The communication logs had referenced embedded assets within the guard units, but hadn't provided specific names. Marcus would need to carefully observe his colleagues over the next few days, looking for signs of suspicious behavior or unauthorized communication that might identify which guards had been compromised. The paranoia was beginning to take its toll on Marcus's daily performance, but he forced himself to maintain his normal routine while conducting his covert investigation. Every interaction with fellow guards became a test of loyalty. Every conversation a potential trap. The conspirators had been planning their operation for years. They would certainly have contingency plans for dealing with anyone who might discover their plot. As the days passed, Marcus began to notice patterns in the behavior of certain palace staff members. 3 guards from different shifts had been taking unusual interest in Prince Sebastian's daily activities, asking questions about his schedule that went beyond their assigned duties. 2 maintenance workers had been accessing areas of the palace that weren't on their regular work assignments. Most concerning of all, the palace's head of communications had been working late hours and had been observed making encrypted calls from his office after normal business hours. The more Marcus investigated, the more extensive the conspiracy appeared to be. The plotters had been remarkably thorough in their preparation, infiltrating every level of palace operations and government service. They had planned for multiple contingencies and had backup plans for their backup plans. With less than 10 days remaining before the Harvest Festival, Marcus realized that time was running out for any hope of preventing the catastrophe through normal channels. He would need to take extraordinary action, risking his career and potentially his life to protect the kingdom he had sworn to serve. The ancient loyalty oath that every royal guard recited upon entering service echoed in his mind. I pledge my life, my honor, and my sacred duty to protect the crown and realm of Valdoria against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The oath had never felt more relevant or more demanding than it did, as Marcus prepared to stand alone against a conspiracy that threatened the very existence of the kingdom. That evening, as he walked the palace grounds one final time before making his move, Marcus reflected on the irony of his situation. He had spent his entire career preparing to protect the royal family from external threats, assassins, terrorists, foreign agents. He had never imagined that the greatest threat would come from within, from people who had been trusted with the highest levels of responsibility and access. The lights of Ravenscroft Palace flickered against the autumn darkness like stars, beautiful and serene, giving no hint of the malevolent forces gathering within its walls. In less than 2 weeks, those same walls might witness the end of a dynasty that had ruled Valdoria for over 3 centuries. Whether that tragedy could still be prevented now depended entirely on the actions of one loyal guard who had accidentally stumbled upon the most dangerous secret in the kingdom's history. Marcus knew that his window of opportunity was rapidly closing. With only 6 days remaining before the Harvest Festival, he had to make his move despite the enormous risks involved. The communication logs had revealed that the conspirators would be holding a final coordination meeting in the abandoned surveillance center 2 nights before the festival. This gathering would bring together the key players in one location, providing Marcus with his best chance to gather additional evidence and potentially identify co-conspirators who hadn't yet been revealed in the electronic records. The decision to attempt surveillance of the conspirators' meeting was not one Marcus made lightly. If discovered, he would face immediate execution as a traitor, as the plotters could not risk exposure so close to their operation's culmination. But the information he might gain could be crucial for understanding the full scope of the plot and identifying any last-minute changes to their plans. Marcus spent an entire day studying the layout of the underground surveillance center and the surrounding tunnels, mapping out multiple escape routes and identifying the best positions for observing the meeting without detection. The old servants' quarters had been built during an era when discretion and invisibility were valued traits in palace staff, and their design included numerous hidden passages and observation points that would serve Marcus well. On the night of the conspirators' meeting, Marcus positioned himself in a concealed alcove that provided visual access to the surveillance center while remaining far enough away to avoid detection. The sophisticated audio equipment that the plotters had installed would actually work in his favor, as he could monitor their conversation through their own surveillance feeds without needing to get close enough to be spotted. What Marcus witnessed during that clandestine gathering confirmed his worst fears and revealed additional horrors he hadn't anticipated. Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackthorne presided over the meeting with the calm authority he displayed in official government sessions, but his words carried a chilling ruthlessness that Marcus had never witnessed in their previous interactions. The primary targets have been confirmed, Blackthorne announced to the assembled group. Prince Sebastian will be eliminated during the ceremonial sword presentation at precisely 3:30 in the afternoon. The explosive device has been integrated into the ceremonial platform and will be triggered remotely when he takes his position. General Harrison Ashford, whose military bearing Marcus had always respected, outlined the secondary phase of their operation with clinical precision. King Aldwin's elimination is scheduled for 4:15 during the traditional blessing ceremony. The poisoned communion wine has been prepared and will be administered by Father Benedict, who has been cooperative since his gambling debts were brought to our attention. But it was Lady Catherine Pemberton who revealed the most shocking aspect of the conspiracy. My son Marcus has been positioned in the diplomatic reviewing stand, surrounded by foreign dignitaries who will provide him with perfect alibis. When the explosions begin, he will heroically attempt to rescue survivors, establishing his credentials as a legitimate leader worthy of emergency powers. The meeting revealed that the Harvest Festival attack was designed to appear as if it had been carried out by domestic terrorists opposed to the monarchy. False evidence had been planted to implicate a fictional revolutionary group, and several innocent citizens had been identified as scapegoats who would be killed while resisting arrest to prevent them from revealing their innocence under questioning. Marcus listened in horror as the conspirators discussed their post-attack plans. Prince Marcus Pemberton would be installed as emergency regent, with broad powers to restore order, and those powers would never be relinquished. The traditional parliamentary system would be suspended indefinitely, and Valdoria would gradually be integrated into Bretonia's sphere of influence through a series of economic and military agreements. Even more disturbing was the revelation that this conspiracy extended far beyond Valdoria's borders. Similar operations were being planned against other small European kingdoms, with the ultimate goal of creating a network of puppet states controlled by Bretonian intelligence. Valdoria was merely the test case for a much larger program of destabilization and conquest. The meeting also revealed the existence of additional surveillance equipment throughout the palace that Marcus hadn't discovered. The conspirators had been monitoring not just the royal family, but also key military officers, government officials, and even foreign diplomats who might pose threats to their operation. The scope of their intelligence gathering was far more extensive than Marcus had realized. As the conspirators finalized their plans, Marcus realized that his original strategy of subtly disrupting the festival timeline would be insufficient. The plot involved multiple independent assassination methods, backup plans for each target, and contingencies for dealing with unexpected complications. Even if he managed to prevent one attack, the others would likely succeed and the conspiracy would achieve its goals. The meeting concluded with Blackthorn issuing final instructions that sent ice through Marcus's veins. Remember that total operational security is essential for the next 4 days. We cannot afford to have our operation compromised when we are this close to success. Marcus waited in his hiding place for nearly an hour after the conspirators dispersed, ensuring that no one remained in the surveillance center who might discover his presence. When he finally emerged from his concealment, he knew that his time for investigation and planning had ended. He needed to take immediate action, regardless of the personal consequences. The challenge he faced was overwhelming. He had irrefutable evidence of a conspiracy to commit treason and murder, but no trustworthy channel for reporting that evidence. The conspirators included the highest levels of government and military leadership, making traditional security protocols useless. Even if he could reach Prince Sebastian or King Aldwin directly, their own security details might include compromised personnel who would prevent any warning from reaching its intended targets. Marcus made a decision that violated every protocol he had been taught during his years of service. He would have to act unilaterally to protect the royal family, even if doing so made him appear to be the very threat he was trying to prevent. The irony was not lost on him that saving the kingdom might require him to behave exactly like the traitors he was fighting against. His first priority was ensuring the safety of Prince Sebastian and King Aldwin during the critical period leading up to the festival. Since he couldn't trust the existing security apparatus, Marcus would have to provide protection through his own resources and methods. This meant staying close to the royal family without authorization and potentially interfering with official security operations if necessary. The next morning, Marcus implemented his protection plan by volunteering for additional shifts and requesting assignments that would keep him in proximity to the royal family. His supervisors, unaware of his true motives, approved the requests as examples of dedicated service during the busy festival preparation period. Marcus also began subtly sabotaging elements of the conspirators' operation wherever possible, without revealing his knowledge of their plans. He accidentally damaged communication equipment that was being used for coordination between the plotters. He introduced minor scheduling changes that would disrupt their carefully timed assassination attempts. He even went so far as to tamper with some of the explosive devices he had located, disabling their remote detonation capabilities while leaving them apparently functional. But Marcus knew that these defensive measures could only buy time. The conspirators had backup plans for their backup plans, and they would adapt to unexpected obstacles with the ruthless efficiency that had characterized their entire operation. To truly defeat the conspiracy, he needed to find a way to expose the plotters publicly and dramatically, in a manner that would make denial impossible, and rally loyal forces to defend the legitimate government. The solution came to him as he observed the final preparations for the Harvest Festival. The ceremony would be broadcast live to the entire kingdom, with television cameras covering every aspect of the royal family's participation in the traditional celebrations. If Marcus could somehow hijack that broadcast and present his evidence to the entire population simultaneously, the conspirators would be unable to suppress the information or eliminate witnesses. Accessing the broadcast equipment would require Marcus to enter areas of the palace where his presence would be immediately suspicious. The television production facilities were heavily guarded by both royal security and the broadcasting company's own personnel. Getting inside would be nearly impossible without alerting someone to his intentions, but Marcus had an advantage that the conspirators didn't know about. During his investigation, he had discovered that the surveillance center's computer system was connected to the palace's main communication network, including the broadcast facilities. If he could access the system remotely, he might be able to interrupt the live coverage and present his evidence directly to the viewing public. The technical challenge was significant, but Marcus had learned enough about the surveillance system to believe it was possible. The conspirators had prioritized monitoring capabilities over security when designing their electronic infrastructure, creating vulnerabilities that could be exploited by someone with inside knowledge of their setup. As the Harvest Festival dawned clear and crisp, with thousands of citizens gathering in the palace courtyard for the traditional celebrations, Marcus made his final preparations. He had hidden copies of all his evidence in multiple locations, both within the palace and in secure sites throughout the kingdom. If his plan failed and he was captured or killed, the truth would eventually surface, even if it came too late to prevent the immediate tragedy. The weight of the kingdom's future rested on his shoulders as Marcus prepared to risk everything on a desperate gamble to save the royal family and preserve Valdoria's independence. In a few hours, he would either be hailed as the kingdom's greatest hero or executed as its most dangerous traitor. The only certainty was that after today, nothing in the kingdom of Valdoria would ever be the same. Standing at his post during the early festival activities, watching Prince Sebastian and King Aldwin greet their subjects with warmth and genuine affection, Marcus felt the full weight of his responsibility. These were good people who served their kingdom with honor and dedication, and they had no idea that powerful forces within their own government were preparing to destroy them. In just a few hours, Marcus would discover whether one loyal guard could stand against an entire conspiracy and emerge victorious. The morning of the Harvest Festival dawned with an unseasonable warmth that seemed to mock the dark intentions lurking beneath the celebratory facade. Marcus had positioned himself strategically within the palace's communication center, having used his security clearance to gain access under the pretense of conducting a routine security sweep. The broadcast equipment hummed quietly around him as technicians made final preparations for the live coverage that would soon reach every television screen in Valdoria. Marcus had spent the pre-dawn hours making final modifications to his plan, knowing that he would have only one opportunity to expose the conspiracy before the assassinations began. The technical challenge of hijacking a live television broadcast was considerable, but his access to the surveillance center's computer system provided a pathway that the conspirators had never anticipated being used against them. At precisely 11:30 in the morning, as the royal family began their traditional procession through the palace courtyard, Marcus initiated the first phase of his operation. Using the surveillance center's connection to the palace network, he began uploading his evidence files to the broadcast system's emergency alert protocols, a system designed to interrupt regular programming in case of national emergencies. The irony was not lost on Marcus, that he was about to create exactly the kind of national emergency that the system had been designed to address. His actions would throw the kingdom into chaos, but that chaos was preferable to the alternative of foreign conquest through treachery and murder. As the festival ceremonies progressed, Marcus monitored both the live broadcast and the conspirators' communication channels, Lord Chancellor Blackthorne was positioned near the ceremonial platform where Prince Sebastian would soon stand for the traditional sword presentation. General Ashford had taken his place among the military dignitaries, his hand never far from the communication device that would trigger the explosive charges. Lady Catherine Pemberton sat with the royal family, her face a mask of composed anticipation, as she prepared to watch her own nephew's murder. At 2:45 in the afternoon, 15 minutes before the scheduled assassination of Prince Sebastian, Marcus activated the emergency broadcast override. Television screens throughout the kingdom suddenly displayed his face instead of the festival coverage, and his voice reached millions of viewers simultaneously. "Citizens of Valdoria," Marcus began, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to reveal. "I am Royal Guard Marcus Thornfield, and I speak to you today to expose a conspiracy that threatens the very existence of our kingdom. What you are about to see and hear is evidence of a plot to murder our royal family and deliver our nation into foreign control." The reaction in the palace courtyard was immediate and electric. The crowd's festive mood shifted to confusion and alarm as they realized something unprecedented was happening. On the ceremonial platform, Prince Sebastian looked toward the broadcast screens with growing concern, while King Aldwin's security detail moved to surround him protectively. But it was the reactions of the conspirators that Marcus found most telling. Through the surveillance feeds he was monitoring, he could see Lord Chancellor Blackthorne frantically trying to communicate with someone off-camera, his face flushed with rage and panic. General Ashford was reaching for his detonation device, clearly preparing to trigger the explosions ahead of schedule, rather than risk exposure. Marcus continued his broadcast, displaying the recorded conversations between Lady Evangeline and her co-conspirators. The audio was crystal clear as millions of viewers heard the Queen Consort discussing plans to remove obstacles and ensure Prince Sebastian never takes the throne. The evidence was damning and undeniable, presented directly to the entire population without any possibility of suppression or distortion. The conspiracy involves Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackthorne, General Harrison Ashford, and Lady Catherine Pemberton, Marcus announced, as photographs and documentary evidence appeared on screens throughout the kingdom. "They have been working with foreign agents from Bretonia to murder our royal family and install a puppet ruler who would serve foreign interests rather than our own people." The crowd in the palace courtyard erupted into chaos as the implications of Marcus's revelations sank in. Citizens who had come to celebrate their nation's traditions now found themselves witnessing the exposure of the greatest betrayal in Valdoria's history. Shouts of outrage and disbelief echoed through the ancient stone walls as people struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what they were hearing. On the ceremonial platform, Prince Sebastian showed the courage and leadership that made him beloved by his people. Rather than fleeing to safety, he stepped forward to address the crowd directly, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard as he called for calm and order. "My people," he announced. "If these allegations are true, then we face our greatest test as a nation. We will meet this challenge together, with truth as our guide and justice as our goal." But the conspirators were not prepared to surrender without a fight. Through his surveillance monitors, Marcus watched as General Ashford activated his communication device, triggering the explosive charges that had been planted beneath the ceremonial platform. The explosion that followed was tremendous, sending debris flying through the crowd and causing panic as people fled in all directions. Marcus's heart sank as he watched the chaos unfold, fearing that his warning had come too late to save Prince Sebastian. But his sabotage of the explosive devices had reduced their effectiveness significantly, and while the blast was dramatic enough to cause confusion, it lacked the lethal force that the conspirators had intended. Prince Sebastian was knocked to the ground by the concussion, but appeared to be uninjured as his security detail quickly surrounded him. The failed assassination attempt only strengthened the impact of Marcus's broadcast. Citizens throughout the kingdom could see with their own eyes that the conspiracy he had exposed was real and immediate. The plotters had just tried to murder their beloved prince exactly as Marcus had predicted, validating every aspect of his revelations. Lady Catherine Pemberton's reaction to the failed bombing was particularly revealing. Instead of showing concern for her nephew's safety, she was frantically trying to escape from the royal viewing area, her composed facade finally cracking under the pressure of exposure. Palace guards, now alerted to her true loyalties, moved to intercept her as she attempted to flee. Lord Chancellor Blackthorne made a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation by claiming that Marcus was himself a foreign agent attempting to destabilize the kingdom. But his credibility was destroyed when Marcus played recordings of Blackthorne's own voice discussing the assassination plans and his coordination with Bretonnian intelligence services. The evidence was too overwhelming and too specific to be dismissed or explained away. The broadcast continued for nearly an hour as Marcus systematically presented every piece of evidence he had gathered over the previous weeks. Financial records showing payments from Bretonnian shell companies, communication logs revealing the conspiracy's coordination with foreign agents, surveillance footage of secret meetings, and recorded conversations planning the royal family's murder. All of it was displayed for the entire kingdom to witness. The most shocking revelation came when Marcus revealed that Prince Marcus Pemberton, who had been positioned to claim the throne after his cousin's murder, was at that very moment en route to Valdoria with a Bretonnian military escort, disguised as a diplomatic convoy. Satellite imagery showed the convoy approaching the kingdom's border, confirming that the conspiracy extended far beyond Valdoria's borders and involved a planned foreign invasion. As Marcus's evidence mounted, the tide of public opinion shifted decisively against the conspirators. Citizens who had initially been confused by the interrupted broadcast now understood that they were witnessing the exposure of a plot that would have destroyed their independence and freedom. The crowd in the palace courtyard began chanting demands for justice, their voices echoing through the capital and across the kingdom. The loyal elements of Valdoria's military and security services rallied to defend the legitimate government once the truth became clear. Officers who had been kept ignorant of the conspiracy by their compromised commanders now moved to arrest the identified traitors and secure critical government facilities. The speed and decisiveness of their response demonstrated that the conspiracy, while extensive, had not succeeded in corrupting the fundamental loyalty of Valdoria's institutions. General Ashford's attempt to rally his supporters among the military failed spectacularly when loyal officers realized that he had been planning to use them as unwitting tools in a foreign-sponsored coup. The general found himself surrounded and under arrest within minutes of the failed bombing, his decades of respected service erased by the revelation of his treachery. Lady Evangeline, who had been the original target of Marcus's surveillance, made a final desperate attempt to escape justice by claiming diplomatic immunity and demanding safe passage to Bretonnian territory. But her recorded conversations had made it clear that she had renounced any claim to protection through her voluntary participation in acts of treason and conspiracy to commit murder. As the immediate crisis subsided and the conspirators were taken into custody, Prince Sebastian sought out Marcus personally to express the kingdom's gratitude. The prince's first words were characteristic of his generous nature. "Guard Thornfield, you have saved not just my life, but the freedom of every citizen in Valdoria. Your courage and loyalty will be remembered for as long as our kingdom endures." King Aldwin's response was even more profound. In a brief address to the nation that evening, the king announced that Marcus would be elevated to the nobility and appointed as the new Lord High Protector, a position that had been vacant for over a century but would now be revived to honor extraordinary service to the crown and realm. The investigation that followed Marcus's revelations uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy's reach throughout Valdoria's government and society. Nearly 50 individuals were ultimately arrested for their roles in the plot, ranging from high-ranking officials to palace staff members who had been recruited through bribery or blackmail. The trials that followed became a national catharsis, allowing the kingdom to confront and purge the corruption that had taken root within its institutions. The Bretonnian convoy that had been approaching Valdoria's border was turned back by military forces that were now fully alerted to the attempted invasion. Diplomatic relations between the two kingdoms were severed entirely, and Bretonnia faced international condemnation for its attempt to destabilize a peaceful neighbor through assassination and coup. Perhaps most importantly, the exposure of the conspiracy strengthened rather than weakened Valdoria's democratic institutions. The citizens' direct witness to the threat against their freedom created a renewed commitment to the values and traditions that made their kingdom unique. The Harvest Festival, which had been intended as the setting for the monarchy's destruction, instead became an annual celebration of truth triumphing over deception and loyalty overcoming treachery. Marcus often reflected on the remarkable series of coincidences that had led to his discovery of the surveillance device behind Lord Aldrich's portrait. A painting hanging slightly askew had revealed a conspiracy that might otherwise have succeeded completely, changing the course of history for an entire nation. The thought reminded him that sometimes the smallest details could have the most profound consequences. Years later, as Lord High Protector of Valdoria, Marcus continued to serve the royal family and the kingdom with the same dedication that had driven him to risk everything to expose the conspiracy. The surveillance equipment that had nearly been used to destroy the monarchy was converted into a museum exhibit, serving as a permanent reminder of the price of vigilance and the importance of courage in defending freedom. The Kingdom of Valdoria emerged from its greatest crisis, stronger and more united than ever before, its independence secured through the actions of one loyal guard who had refused to let treachery triumph over truth. The ancient motto carved above the palace entrance, Veritas et Honor, had never seemed more relevant or more inspiring than it did in the aftermath of Marcus Thornfield's courageous stand against the forces that had sought to destroy everything the kingdom represented.